Okay. So I would just like to start by saying we've had a little issues of our agenda, not either things being pulled from the agenda or not added at until the last minute, or the materials are needed or not always available 2 days ahead of time as they should be. This particular time online it says that we would have the presentation of the APD's multi-year work plan, and it appears to be pulled. It's not full. Are we getting that today?
APD's quarterly update.
But then a multi-year work plan.
It's on the document.
It's one of the documents that's provided as support
Part of
for
that?
update. Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, I just would like to, well, and written consent having been added at the last minute. Anyhow, I would just appreciate it if we could try to get this tightened up just a little bit and not always seem to be searching for materials or where something went or why it's not there. Okay. So can we get approval of the minutes?
I would make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. Okay. We'll start with updates and reports. First up is APD quarterly report.
Good afternoon. I am Deputy Chief Wadewood, and I am here to present the quarterly report for the Asheville Police Department. And I agree, I apologize for the confusion between last month's and this month's with the information. Oh, thank you. With the information confusion or debacle, however you want to refer to that. But with that, just want to do a high-level review of the documents that you received both last month and this month that we're going to review. This is pretty much for the first fiscal quarter of 2018-2019. And I don't have the chart, but it is in the handouts that you received. It's this document with the year one part one crimes. Just want to emphasize that this quarter we had a huge impact year to date in reducing violent part one crimes by 1% across the city, which is pretty big feat. I think hovering around 20+% at one point in the year where we were above year-to-date rates. So there's a lot of effort by our men and women to do some proactive policing, some heavy foot patrol, which was a large concentration.
Okay, so hold on just a minute. So violent crime is down 2.3% year to date, but in May it was actually up 23%. So between May and now, that's a 27% decrease in crime over the same comparable period. I mean, it's a
huge impact.
That's a big deal. So
Yes.
Congratulations to APD, and appreciate the proactive work.
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, and I think in the report that we through November, year to date through, for this first quarter was 1%, but we are hovering about 2% now year to date with where we are in December. So it's certainly been a lot of proactive and concerted efforts by the men and women to help focus on that. Not having as much luck with the part one property crimes. They've increased by about 9%, but that is not probably a trend that we have been seeing. It's just a lot of those crimes, as you can also refer to on the map, the chart that we have. So we are not ignoring that. We're trying to come up with methods to address part one property crimes as well. It's just, as you can imagine, a little more challenging to hone in on those, but we are not going to turn a blind eye on those. The second part that I want to address is the other document, which was the traffic stop report. Certainly, we've been doing the quarterly traffic stop report for a while now, and this report is fairly consistent with where we've been. The one thing that we added in this report was a heat map showing the locations of traffic stops and traffic stop searches as a result of traffic stops by race. And so if you look at this one is based on white drivers, and this one is based on black drivers. Pretty consistent, and I think if you look at the full quarterly report for traffic stops, you'll note that the pattern still mirrors closely the violent crimes and Part 1 crimes that we're trying to address in correlation to where the traffic stop locations are taking place. I will also reiterate that with the traffic stops that we are still with the consent searches. We are reviewing all the body-worn cameras to ensure that consent was obtained properly, and we continue with that pattern as well.
Have you had any deviations from that? I mean, any?
No, not validly obtained?
Right.
No.
And the consent searches, is that one on page 14? Am I right? That it says, there's 13.
I think it's 13.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you look
So
at-
there were 36 consent searches. What year? I'm sorry, was that year to date?
July through September.
This is the first quarter.
Oh. And how does that? Oh, here, no.
So if you look on page 13, that chart has the breakdown where 36, there were, let's see, 1,560 traffic stops,
Yep.
1,433 that were not searched, 127 were searched, and 36 had, of those searches, 36 were consent. And the breakdown just by race of searches were, consent searches were 28 were on white drivers, 8 on black. It's in the table.
Yep. Yeah, so I just
Send it
was.
now.
Oh, please.
And I think both of these, or these were sent out both last month and this month. Excuse me. Questions on that?
Are those numbers
Just the
close
first
to
quarter.
the previous quarter? Or,
Those numbers on page 13 are just the current, well.
Do we have any
last quarter.
comparisons, to Brian's point,
Uh,
searches quarter to quarter, or?
I don't know if
I
that's.
mean, I know the percentage breakdown is about the same.
You mean consent to total?
For traffic stops.
I think it's rather consistent, but we can certainly pull up the last quarter report. I apologize for having that on. So the next document, we've been working closely with the City Hall staff and Jamie Matthews and the other folks to get open data as much as we can. And the most recent one is the APD use of force data, which has been published for the city's portal, which is a huge step for us because there was a lot of legal restrictions within North Carolina, and I think we came up with a good compromise to be able to get out the information that we're trying to get out to the public to vet and to see, as well as calls for service and citizen complaints. That was also released prior to this. And as well, this is still a work in progress for us to continue to work with the city staff to see what other data we're able to make available. Yes, ma'am.
So I was just previously at the ComStat meeting, and they were talking about motor vehicle incidents, and that's really the highest number of calls that
Time-consuming, yes.
Time-consuming calls. Do we have a breakdown of the people involved in the motor vehicle accidents or incidents, local versus outside of Asheville?
I don't think we have, we used to do that periodically, just try to run who is a resident or not. I don't think we've done that recently, but I think one thing that is clear in a lot of the motor vehicle accidents, as well as even some of the traffic stops data, is that when we're making the stops, most of those are not either involved in the accident or making the stops or not immediately from that residential area or the location where the stop occurs. So I think certainly with the high tourism that we have, I would say that, and that's kind of what spurred our initial inquiry a few years ago, was the number of tourists coming to town, and we were looking at trying to see if there's another way that we can collect some revenues from those that per accident, and that never got off the ground. But that's one of the reasons we looked at that.
I'm just, as we approach the budget cycle, if we could, kind of cut that data that way, like number of calls, because a lot of the community has made they have made the observation that we have more police per population.
Right.
And more calls per population, et cetera. And I think if you helped council to better understand the number of calls that actually don't involve residents of Asheville, which is which is what people are basing that statement on. It's actually the residency of Asheville. I think that would be good information for council to look at as we're looking at our for the upcoming budget and staffing, et cetera. And I don't know if it's as relevant for the fire department, but it may be, because the fire department gets called to a lot of motor vehicle incidents, from what I understand. So that may be also interesting information for to get for the fire department too.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense from the police department perspective. If we have to get that data, we should be able to get a good report of that for you as well.
Thank you.
Leaving open data, moving to another positive event for the police department was we just graduated 8 cadets with the recent AV Tech Basic Law Enforcement Academy. Glad to have those folks coming on board. They will be starting soon. They're awaiting their North Carolina State certification and doing some in-house training to follow up. But a good addition to the department, and with that we've also been able to hire I think a couple more officers. So we'll have like 11 or 12, that 1 or 2 from this class, as well as some laterals that we will be bringing on and putting into our field training program soon. Go ahead.
I'm not sure I understand that. So basic law enforcement, I thought, was for folks who, they're gonna start with APD, sort of at the base level. And so when you say laterals, it's like, well, where are they if?
Yeah, so the basic law enforcement training program is done through multiple community colleges throughout the state. The state will review their certification. They just have to have a law enforcement sponsor. A good majority of the attendees are not hired by an agency at the time they're going through basic law enforcement training. So if they have a law enforcement agency sponsor them, which several in this class did, they will then seek employment full-time once they get BLET under their belt, and they're eligible for state certification as a police officer a year from their graduation. So that's how. So some of those are coming in as certification eligible upon completion of that, who we did not sponsor on the front end.
How do we
And then-
decide who we sponsor?
I'm
How
sorry?
do we decide who we sponsor?
We just let you. It's basically we really don't sponsor many unless we're hiring them, because we're one of the few agencies that actually hire folks.
Based on what merit?
The state qualifications, the minimum qualifications for the state, and to be hired as an officer for us. So you can't be a convicted felon, you have to be 20 years of age. several factors going in, but that's the main, and then drug use is always a factor, but that's certain levels. It depends on the agency where those levels are. But the ones that are hard and fast by the state is primarily what we're looking at. But for us to do it, you would have to meet our hiring requirements as well.
So we somewhat recruit these folks, the people that we sponsor?
Oh, yes, we have.
So basically APD has recruited them and said, hey, we want you to go through the BLET program. And have we hired them?
We hire them.
They're literally on our payroll when they go through BLET.
Correct. Yeah, we try to bring folks in about a month to 6 weeks ahead of time to, because there's a fiscal
There's
fitness
more
component
training.
to it. And it gives them an opportunity to review some policies and procedures as well and expectations. But yes, so we do hire, we recruit and hire folks that we will send to the basic law enforcement academy. And it can be a college graduate, a high school graduate. The minimum requirement for the state is a GED or high school diploma. So we hire with the GED or above, and then no felony convictions and or equivalent in another state.
Well, other than what you mentioned, what would disqualify a person from being hired on?
Psychological, we put folks for a psychological exam, and then also recent drug use, depending on the type of drug, would be a disqualifier. Typically, your hallucinogens are an automatic disqualifier. But marijuana, I think we're 2 years. I think 2 years, 2.5 years recent, and that's changing. But that's kind of discretion by the agency. So you have polygraph and psychological.
And when marijuana becomes legal, that will change.
Possible. Yes, and there is a trend, and I have friends in states such as Colorado that are dealing with that as well, so they're trying to figure out how that is impacting them as a law enforcement agency. So,
How about minority recruitment? Have you had any success there?
we're still struggling. We've had I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think what we have. We're just now hiring for a class that starts in late January. I think we have one minority being hired in this class. It's a challenge. I'll be honest, hiring in general is a challenge for sworn. It's nationwide, it's not just Asheville, but we're certainly seeing our numbers of applicants go down, and particularly minorities applicants are fewer and far between. We usually have a pretty good percentage of female applicants, which is, I would say we're higher than the national average. I think we tend to be around 15% female, which is pretty good for law enforcement. But certainly areas that we need to continue to try to be creative and think outside the box, and a lot of partnerships with the community to try to get folks to our door would be a huge asset for us.
But there is a recruitment focus on minority.
Yes, yeah, we currently, we go, and we do recruitment drives. We go outside of Asheville, we go to do HBCUs, we go to military bases, so, and we try to go locally as well, try to have partnerships as well, but it's multifaceted, multi-pronged approaches, but there's several folks that we're competing with as well. But that is one thing that is in our favor, is that we actually hire you to go to the academy, which I think we're one of the few west of Charlotte that do that, but it's still a challenge to bring someone in for law enforcement these days. We just got to be more creative. And the last note for us, another positive, is we've implemented a community liaison program, which assigns a command level staff person to one of 15 communities that we've identified in Asheville. We have a lot of officers that are doing this already, engaging, particularly our community resource officers or CROs, but this gives a command level presence to a community group to liaison with, to have a lieutenant or above, typically a lieutenant or a captain will be appointed to be the liaison to one of these 15 groups, and to have just a staff person that they can voice their concerns to or their praises to. And we started that in October of 18. Several of our staff have already met with their community groups and had positive feedback already. So I think it's something that will continue to get legs and start growing for us. I think it's something that will help us with our perception in the community, but also just our relations in the community.
Did the community offer any input as to who their community liaison would be, or did we pick from inside?
No, we let our command staff actually select, because most of those had either worked or currently working in the areas that they selected. So they have a familiarity with it, but your point's well taken. So there is some 99, I'd say 90%, there is an exposure level or knowledge base of the group that they've selected. That is all I have for the update, unless there's any other questions. Excuse me.
The only thing I would ask in this is, just in the multi-year work plan, that was in our documents, first of all, I appreciate the fact that you could actually read all of them and they weren't cut off in all the little squares. But you know, if there's a way to kind of give us a little bit of a dashboard, I think it's like 22 pages long, which I'm sure is fascinating to you, but hard for me to read and see whether there's an issue or whatever. And I wondered if there was a way that we could, I don't know, color code or something like that, so that we could see if there were areas that, you know, that we should be concerned about, or be interacting with the city manager about resource allocation or something like that. So it would be easier for me to read the report.
I agree. It's tough for me to read, so I understand. I agree with your point. I think they're certainly hitting the highlights, and City Manager Campbell, we had a brief discussion on, not this topic, but something similar, where hit the highlights, so we can certainly make that clear to you all. So we can certainly do that in the future. All right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
The written consent update?
Are we done?
Who's doing the written consent?
I will.
Okay.
Yeah, so with the written consent, just wanted to update you all. At the last Citizens Police Advisory Committee, I provided an update on where we were with that project as well, and I'm going to do so here as well. I've spoken with City Manager Campbell, and I know where we were looking at with our looking forward for APD and the written consent directive. Wants to take time to understand the full scope of the request of council, and to understand what the goals are by having written consent, and want to ensure that we are able to implement a holistic approach and not just hit one item that may or may not address the goals or the desired outcomes. So with that, I know she's going to plan to meet with council, and probably has already started doing so. And also the other major component to that is want to make sure that the next chief of police is able to review and have some insight into any policy modifications or directives along that line. Because it is going to be a big change and a big public input. So it's something to make sure that we, I think, in fairness to chief, or to the new chief, but also to the city manager, to have time to digest and look at where we want to go as a community, and what's really going to meet the goals of council and the needs of the community and the police department. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, next, under new business, community risk reduction and emergency response.
Good afternoon. Hey, Kelly Hines, Fire Marshal, Fire Department. And today I was asked to talk about community risk reduction and what Asheville is doing in community risk reduction and what exactly it is. I think I need to put it out. Right click. We won't get big pictures, but nonetheless. So when we talk about what the fire department does, first thing, anybody, if you're asked, what does the fire department do? What do you expect the fire department to do? When you pick up the phone and dial 911 and you need help, fire department comes, right? You have an emergency, we respond. So naturally, and by tradition, the fire department is reactive in nature, right? Somebody has to call us, and then we respond. Well, we know that nationally, there's still over 3,000 deaths that occur from fires each year. And that's still too much, way too many. So we need to change things in order to be more proactive in nature. So getting to do things before somebody has to call 911 and ask for our help. Okay, and so the way we do that is through the 5 E's, right? The actual definition for community risk reduction are the programs, actions, and services used by a community which prevent or mitigate the loss of life, property, and resources associated with life safety, fire, and other disasters within a community. So anything that is used or that we do in order to prevent these things and the significance of these instances from happening is what community risk reduction is. That takes place in the fire marshal's office for the most part, although response is one of the 5 E's, right? When we talk about community risk reduction, nationally it's a program to make things easier. It's called the 5 E's of community risk reduction. So that includes education, enforcement, engineering, economic incentives, and emergency response. So you can see that emergency response is still part of community risk reduction and plays a very important role in it, but so do the other aspects of community risk reduction. So education, we do several things to get out into the community to provide education. We use enforcement, and that's done through inspections and codes and making sure that people are following the rules. Engineering, so we're talking about the water systems that are needed for fire safety sprinklers, smoke alarms and things like that have to do with engineering that save lives. Economic incentives, that could be free or reduced prices for certain fire safety appliances, we call them, and then again, emergency response. So it's not only calling 911 and being able to get there, but it's training the staff, our staffing levels that go along with that, and our response time to get to places. Right, the fire marshal's office is made up of 18 full-time employees plus myself, so a total of 19. That includes the inspections, for mandatory state inspections, code enforcement, and plans review. With the development, our plans review has been a huge pull on our resources right now. Life safety education and fire investigations is also a part of community risk reduction. As far as our inspections, code enforcement, and plans review, we have so far in 2018 conducted, oh my glasses to read this one, 3,257 periodic inspections of businesses. We have a total of over 9,000 within the city. Some of those are inspected every 6 months, such as public schools, and that's based on state mandates, but prioritized based on risk. Public schools every 6 months. Hospitals, restaurants and bars, anywhere where anyone sleeps is inspected on an annual basis. Factory industrials every 2 years, and then businesses are inspected every 3 years. And mercantile. Re-inspections, we've conducted more than 575, but 575 of the re-inspections were where we had to do some sort of fine or fee based on non-compliance. Permit inspections, so once the plans review.
The money's collected, do they stay within the department?
They do not, they go into the general fund. And any citations, just on a side note, the citations go back to the public schools. They go into the school system.
Just like
Just
traffic
for
violations.
violations.
And Kelly, just because I'm somewhat familiar with smoke detectors, do you have an estimate of, I mean, I forget what year it was, in the 70s, I think, where new buildings were required to have hardwired smoke detectors in them. Do you have a feel for, in Asheville, how many of our buildings aren't under that code where you had to build it and be hardwired?
So those aren't commercial buildings, those are
Right,
single family
residential,
dwelling,
right.
residential. And, I do not have that exact number, but it does go into our community risk assessment, that is in other paperwork. And we use those risk assessments when we choose a community to go in and target to install smoke alarms. So we do collect that information and try and target the older homes, in order to make sure that they're brought up to what we would think as meeting minimum standards. So we don't go in and do any wiring as far as hardwired smoke alarms, but we do install 10-year smoke alarms and put them in each sleeping room, outside the sleeping rooms, and at least one on each floor.
Thank you.
Sure. We've, as far as plans reviews, we've conducted 1,355, and we've issued 196 code violation citations. As far as fire and life safety education, we do have several programs in place. One of them, and one of my favorites, is the Citizens Fire Academy, which we will be asking for interested parties beginning in the spring. So that's when we hold that. Fire escape camp for middle school age kids. We do a heavy fire prevention month in October because it's fire safety month. And we go into all the elementary schools and target elementary and first graders. And so that's all the schools, elementary grade levels, whether it's private, charter, public schools that are within our city limits, and do education. We have and conduct child passenger safety seat checks. Believe it or not, it's a week-long 40-hour class to learn how to install child safety seats.
Well, if you've ever done it, you know why.
That's right, that's right, they are challenging. So we do currently have over 100 certified technicians that are certified to help our citizens with the installation of car seats. And we partner with Safe Kids out of Mission Hospital in order to provide car seats to those who need them. We do fire extinguisher classes for businesses as well as city staff. We do fall-in fire prevention for older adults. Get Alarmed Asheville is our smoke alarm and home safety initiative. Last year, we installed 720 smoke alarms in our community. We do station tours and attend community events often. Fire investigations. Fire investigations is also a part of community risk reduction, in that the fire chief is tasked with the investigation of every fire, so the cause of the fire and where it originated, cause and origin. So in that, every fire has to be investigated. So we do that. The purposes of fire investigation is so that we know the reasons why and what is starting them, so that we can prevent them in the future. Right, so whether that's arsons and arresting arsonists, or whether that's something that's in common, maybe it's a malfunction of an appliance, and that we get, that's, you know, somehow a same appliance, and we get it recalled and get on the recall list. So every fire, it's important to find out why it occurred, so that we can then use that information to prevent it in the future. In community risk reduction, we rely greatly on community partners. Right, so I have included a list of community partners. I've already mentioned Safe Kids Coalition, the State Office of the State Fire Marshal, which we get funding from to provide smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. The Red Cross with smoke alarms as well, and they also help us with manpower and resources in order to go out into the community and install the smoke alarms properly. So lots of community partnerships that we form to create and get everyone involved in community risk reduction. That's a very important part to include the community. National and state partnerships as well help us with resources in order to provide education. They provide lots of printed materials and items such as that, as well as FEMA has had a large grant that thus far has been able to provide all the smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms that we've installed thus far. And I included a few pictures of some of the community risk reduction programs that we've had. So this is our Citizens Fire Academy. We have adults go through. They learn every aspect of the fire department and what we do and how we do it and what resources are required in order to be prepared. There's the fire investigations. I can get this thing working. Kind of froze up on me. The top one is a model of a fire sprinkler. It's a trailer that has one living room set up with a fire sprinkler, one sprinkler head attached. The other one is an exact same room with the same fire load without sprinklers. And you get to watch them side by side to see how a fire sprinkler is so important to put fires out and how they work. The bottom one is at Asheville High, where we simulated a distracted driver that was a high school student distracted driver. And so it's a simulation. You can see the kids watching in the background, and we actually run like a scenario where there was a traffic accident and what could happen and what happens at a scene due to distracted driving. I cannot see here. Child in a passenger seat. There's our kids' summer camp, and they're trying on the fire gear. Our new fire safety house that we've obtained through grant funding. And this is in October when we go to schools and we enforce that firefighters are your friends, not to hide, because we can be really scary when we have on all the gear and everything and not be able to talk. And so we want kids to know that in case of a fire, they need to come up and make themselves available and not hide from us. That is the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions?
No. Thank you.
Thank you again for having me.
So next under new business, we have noise ordinance modification.
Good afternoon, John Maddox from the City Attorney's Office. I'll talk to you about some possible modifications to the noise ordinance. So first, by way of background, I should explain maybe a little bit how we got here. So I've been with the city for 4.5 years, and one of my duties is to serve as the attorney for our noise ordinance appeals board. Now, it didn't take me too long to figure out that this thing was not working particularly well for a lot of people who were bringing complaints before the noise ordinance appeals board. So several years ago, I asked the administrative secretary at APD, who is the primary contact person for noise issues, to start sending every noise-related citizen to call to my desk, which means for the past several years now, I've heard about every loud air conditioner, barking dog, faulty muffler, lawnmower, neighbor who runs power saw, concrete plant, concert, you name it. I've heard about the noise in Asheville. gotten a unique perspective on how our noise ordinance works. Recently, we've seen a real uptick in the types of complaints that we're receiving. A lot of them, not surprisingly, are related to construction noise, as well as noise coming from established businesses. Businesses that are operating within their particular zoning district. It's a use that is allowed within their zoning district, but it's a little bit loud. We recently, for instance, had a complaint with Mission Hospital, complaint brought by the Kenilworth Residents Association, complaining not about the ambulances or the helicopter like you might expect, but actually about the physical plant on the various buildings at Mission Hospital, the air conditioner or air filtration systems. That came to the Noise Ordinance Appeals Board. We had 40 people come in for a hearing that ultimately they decided to not continue with after trying to go through the process for a little while. I say this as these complaints have come in for years now, and we've had a little drop off of complaints brought to the Noise Ordinance Appeals Board. Primarily because I've explained to folks how the Noise Ordinance Appeals Board works and what they can do. Someone brings a complaint, we have to have a hearing. They need to present witnesses and evidence. It's a quasi-judicial hearing. The other side has to have a chance to respond, the board has to deliberate. At the end of that, the board does not have the authority to make a business shut down, or make somebody turn down their radio, or stop playing their live guitar. What they can do is they can order a $50 citation for a first offense. Then if they want to go to the level of a $100 citation, they're going to need to come in the next month and have another hearing like this. So, not surprisingly, once I began to explain the process to people, the number of complaints dropped off fairly dramatically. Because even when we had hearings, I think Councilmember Whistler can attest to this, not many people were leaving happy, even when they won. So,
Yeah, I've been the liaison for this board, I think since I've been on council.
as long as I'm here, yes.
I've come to numerous of your.
And in thinking about what are the problems with this, it strikes me that a lot of times for these types of disputes involving noise, what folks need is mediation, not an adversarial process. And to the extent that when people would bring some complaints, I would have the board in one room and I would sit down with the parties and say, listen, we can get the board in here and have a full hearing, but why don't we talk for a few minutes to see if we can work this out? A lot of the time that worked, and we didn't even have to have a hearing. But it's just the folks who never sat down and had a conversation around these issues. So with all this background in mind, I've been thinking about the noise ordinance, and when the report you received, and I apologize, it was one of those late ones that you were talking about at the beginning of the meeting. We've just been a little bit overworked in the office lately, and I apologize, it wasn't really in a finished state until today. But there's the staff report, and there's also a more comprehensive memorandum that provides a little more background about the noise ordinance that provides y'all. In thinking about the ordinance and going through this, and these things mention staff. I'm the staff. So staff is considered staff for out to me. And so this hasn't gone through the city manager's office, it's just me looking at this for a number of years. This isn't the role I typically step into as the attorney for the police department, fire department, and advising the city. But it seemed like the need was there, so I've made these proposals. The modifications that I'm proposing are not wholesale changes to the ordinance. This is not something where we've gone through, evaluated various noise ordinance standards, because there's a lot of different ways to regulate noise. Everybody has an opinion about how you need to regulate noise. I have not gone through that process for this, and if that's something that City Council wants to explore, I suggest obviously should do this. It seems like we do this about every 10 years from my research into this issue. Is every 10, 12 years we revise the noise ordinance and think about adopting new standards. We go through a discussion about the noise ordinance. This is not that.
How long's it been?
It was last revised in 2000.
Not long enough. I've had another 4 years.
It was last revised in 2012. But before then, there were, I believe, 2002 was the time before. So maybe we're accelerating. This is not a wholesale revision. What I'm suggesting. This is some changes I'm hoping to make our present structure work a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently, and maybe help the police with enforcement, but also help citizens, because the ordinance is written in a confusing way. Part of that is the mishmash of amendments and changes that have been made over the years, but not really considered in a holistic fashion. I've tried to consider if this is the standard that we're going to use for regulating noise in the city, to think about how that is going to work in a little bit more holistic fashion. So the first proposed change is that currently the noise ordinance is punishable as a civil penalty. It's a $50 citation for the first offense, $100 for the second, $200, and up to $300 for a fourth or subsequent offense. This is one occurring within 8 years. Those fines are all but uncollectible. In this case, a civil penalty works well when you're talking about, say, a land use or a short-term rental where you have a continuing violation every single day and you're racking up fees. Because pretty soon you get to the point where it makes sense to bring a lawsuit to enforce it. That is not the case here when it's small $50, $100 fines. The filing fees to file a suit are often more than we would recover if we were to pursue enforcement through civil penalties. Also, it places the administration of the civil penalties on the city rather than over the court, where police officers are used to dealing with traffic tickets and things through the court over there. They're a little bit less used to the civil penalty process, and I think it is one of the reasons why police officers do not enforce the noise ordinance as rigorously as they possibly could. But it leads just a lot of inefficiencies when you have a whole system set up over next door to the city hall to help with the administration of what happens after the citation. Now, we're talking about criminalizing noise? Not precisely. So under North Carolina law, an ordinance can be made punishable by a Class 3 misdemeanor, which is the lowest level misdemeanor, or as an infraction, which is non-criminal, and is not something that someone needs to disclose when they are talking about their criminal record. It's the nature of like a traffic violation. What I'm proposing is that we remove all of the portions dealing with civil penalties and make it into an infraction. It's punishable as an infraction. This also means that a citizen, let's say what often happens, a police officer gets there after the noise has stopped, or they hear the noise and they just do not agree that it rises to the level of a noise disturbance as defined by the noise ordinance. Reasonable people can't disagree. If a citizen thinks that the police come to an incorrect conclusion or they didn't hear it, they can always go to the magistrate's office and ask that for a summons be issued for a violation of our city's noise ordinance. So they would have an avenue outside of merely police enforcement.
I have a question there.
Yes, ma'am.
Even though it's non-criminal, it's a non-criminal violation, it does show up on people's criminal background, right?
I don't believe so. I could be incorrect. I'm not sure. I think it might depend on the level of criminal background that you are. Right, but North Carolina law says that these are non-criminal offenses. So if City Council adopts that revision, makes it into an infraction, that is going to lead to a couple of different things. First of all, the Noise Ordinance Appeals Board, which, let's say they find somebody has committed a violation of the noise ordinance, 2 citizens can bring a complaint, it can be filed with the Noise Ordinance Appeals Board, have the hearing, the Noise Ordinance Appeals Board issues a citation. Well, it's a civil penalty citation, same as if a police officer heard it. But Noise Board is not sworn law enforcement, so they would not be able to issue an infraction. So I'm proposing eliminating this Noise Ordinance Appeals Board. Now, as I said, it's wildly inefficient and not terribly successful at mediating noise disputes. So I don't believe the city would be giving up too terribly much by it. I've spoken about this with members of that board, and they wholeheartedly agree. And by eliminating this as an avenue for enforcement of the noise ordinance, it's not that by making the penalty an infraction, you'd still be leaving folks an avenue to go to through the magistrate's office, like we discussed. I think this would actually help folks maybe go more toward mediation when you don't have this adversarial process hanging out there like this for folks to channel their frustrations and their disputes through. There's maybe a chance that folks, and I don't have any sort of respects of this speculation, folks might be able to, they might be more inclined to mediate their disputes rather than assume an adversarial posture.
John, just
Yes, ma'am.
because I'm not as familiar with the judicial side of things.
Sure.
Thank God. So if someone were to go to the magistrate, would a magistrate have the authority, or would he or she say to the party, okay, you know, or you two ought to go to mediation, or, I mean, what happens when
They
they
can-
show up at the magistrate's office?
The magistrate doesn't have the authority to require someone to go to mediation.
Okay.
I know that the county, so for barking dogs, this is something coming more from the DA's office than the magistrate's office. But this was something that was put into place years ago where let's say if somebody has a barking dog, they used to have a whole lot of barking dog complaints coming through there. And I think the old DA got a little bit upset about this, so he put into place a process whereby folks had to fill out a bark packet, is what they called it. So folks would, and this is still something that I used to talk to the county attorney about this not too long ago. When you have a complaint that a dog is barking, then you have a bark packet. You fill out this log of times that the dog is barking. You're required to go to the Buncombe County Mediation Center and at least try to get the other party to go to the mediation center. And then failing all of that, then you can go to the magistrate and have them issue a summons for a violation of the Buncombe County ordinance, which I believe is actually a misdemeanor. And then they will process it through there. We're not talking about anything quite as involved. One might imagine if they start seeing a ton of city of Asheville noise ordinance violations, that they might want to put in some kind of process around this. But I've spoken with the DA, and he seemed pretty confident that they could absorb the volume, which is not terribly significant, of ordinance violations that might come their way from this.
How would a violator be noticed? Will they receive something by mail?
That's my understanding, yes. The summons is sent by mail. I do not have enough information about the process. It might be that the civil service folks in people who serve civil service in the sheriff's department are the ones who might serve that there. I do not have the mechanics on that.
Okay. So keep going.
Okay, so that's sort of, those two are of a piece. The next bit, the ordinance does not effectively address the noise concerns caused by building construction. As I said, a large volume of complaints I hear about these days are construction-based. But I have to say, police officers called to respond to citizen complaints, somebody's called 911, or they've called a non-emergency line. They're not in the best position to evaluate whether a construction project is being conducted in an unreasonable manner. Right? Obviously, folks have construction permits. It's being built in an area where it's allowed to be built. One should hope. If it's not, that's a whole other set of problems. And they're not in the best position maybe to balance those competing interests. So, but that we do have a city department who is in possibly a better position to enforce those competing interests, which is our Development Services Department, which issues those permits that they're constructing under. I'm confident that under North Carolina law, our authority to regulate noise, which is fairly broad considering grants of authority from the General Assembly to regulate areas like this, would allow us to, as part of the permitting process, to place some restrictions on how the construction proceeds as regards to noise. This could include after hours permitting requirements. This could, for larger sites, it could include possibly discussions about routing trucks in certain ways, blocking off equipment that is a stationary source, say a large compressor or a generator on a work site, when it's close to a sensitive noise source. And the nice thing about this is that it's something that's enforced by Development Services, and it's a component of the building permit process. They have some real leverage behind them to see if these things are enforced, and that they're issuing the permits. Right? The permits, they can issue stop work orders, things like that. I'm not saying the Development Services is going to jump full force into doing that, but I do think if they have that authority, they can craft something that's going to work better than what it is right now. So that would be what this would require on a technical level is we would exempt noise caused by construction from enforcement under the noise ordinances, and we would place it over in the portion of the noise of the ordinances that deal with construction and building permitting. So it might look like it's being, like they're saying construction noise isn't something that could be cited anymore. It won't be cited by police officers, but it can be dealt with through our Development Services Department. And I have talked with our Development Services Department, they're okay to do this. This isn't just something I'm throwing out there, throwing them under the bus. The other portion, the next proposed change is noise caused by barking dogs is currently regulated under both the noise ordinance and also the animal ordinances contained in Chapter 3 of our code. This has led to confusion since the day I got here. Our animal control officers are never sure what authority they're proceeding under. And I would suggest that you remove this as a component of the noise ordinance and regulate it solely through the animal ordinance. That would still be enforceable as a civil penalty, and this would allow animal control officers to continue to enforce this even if you make a violation an infraction. Animal control officers are not sworn law enforcement officers, so that they are allowed to issue civil penalties but not infractions. So by removing that regulation under the animal ordinances and not the noise ordinance, they can continue to do that work, and they are the front lines of dealing with barking dogs. Also, the last proposed change last change I'm proposing is that the noise ordinance contains a number of redundant, confusing sections. Primarily, there's a large section there that talks about recurrent, frequent sources of complaint. And it says that these types of activities, the council has found that they are a frequent source of complaint and that they frequently cause a noise disturbance. And it includes a whole list of things like yelling and shouting and parties. But that ultimately doesn't mean anything, and it leads to a lot of confusion. I have citizens call every week confused about some portion of this, and this isn't allowed, and these people are doing it, and they're violating the noise ordinance. Well, no, if you keep reading there, it says that they're not allowed to do that in an unreasonable manner. So you still have to make that call. So it's confusing, it's superfluous, and I would like to take it out. As long as we're in here tinkering around, let's go ahead and clean that section up. So that is what I have here. As I recognize that this is not something that's going to address everybody's concerns. This might not, this doesn't do enough possibly to address the concerns from, say, ongoing businesses. I don't think ultimately that there's a easy, quick way to regulate noise from a business. I know that we've heard a lot about that concrete plant on Pond Road for years. We heard about, when I first came here, it was Ben's Tuna. Then it returned to the salvage station as the latest one, Stump Dump. These kinds of complaints have come from citizens over the years, and we're not in a good position to regulate those, because if you're going to regulate those as sources of noise, the primary way to do that is through your zoning. And these businesses operating in an area where they are allowed to operate are going to create that noise. So if you're going to address those concerns, it needs to be done upfront through your zoning ordinance. Typically is the most efficient, best way to get there. Otherwise, it turns into more of a public nuisance versus private nuisance, and it's not a good area for us to regulate. So any questions?
So John, are you saying that, so if folks have a complaint with the stuff or the salvage station or any of these things, what can they do? You're saying that
Currently, right now, they can call the police, and the police can come out and, they try to be in the same position as the person who's complaining, try to hear what the noise is, and they'll listen, and they'll evaluate according to these factors that are listed in here. The time of day that's occurring, the nature and zoning of the area, the proximity to residential areas, whether it's intermittent or continuous, and they'll weigh, does this constitute a violation of the noise ordinance? And I'll say that police officers, in my experience, are loath to issue a citation to a business operating in an area which that business is zoned to operate. Also, they aren't there listening to it all day, so maybe their frustration level isn't as high as the person who's all complaining. And they just might simply just not agree that it is a violation. I will say that the police officer, though, listening there is in a far better position to evaluate the noise than a noise ordinance appeals board, well after the fact, who's not on site, who doesn't have any environmental conditions, and is just getting testimony, essentially.
But, so say the police officer, I also thought I heard you say a police officer comes and he or she doesn't agree and doesn't issue a citation, the citizen or resident has the right then to go to the magistrate and file a complaint with the magistrate saying, I think this business is violating the noise ordinance.
Yes, it was not filing a complaint, so maybe not the best way to characterize it. They're going to ask the magistrate to issue a summons.
Right, okay.
For a file. North Carolina's kind of unique that way, in that anybody can go and swear out a warrant at the magistrate. Not a lot of states have that, but we do.
And so they would have a second avenue.
Yes.
In the event that a police officer doesn't hear the same thing.
That's correct. For instance, maybe not exactly parallel, but police are often called to help assist with evictions, right? So this guy's staying in my house, he's not paying the rent, he won't leave. Well, police are often show up and they don't have the ability to evaluate all those relative facts right there. Does he have a lease, or is he a trespasser? They're not sure. They bisexually give us, tell the person that you understand their concern, but really, there's a good chance that this is something that needs to go through the normal eviction process. So tell them to go down to the magistrate's office if they really believe that something criminal is happening, and they can ask the magistrate if they have probable cause, and they can bring all their evidence. Then they can be handled through that avenue. But if you're there and you don't have the ability to make a honest determination, you need to not arrest based on that. It's a sort of parallel. That you do not believe that this rises to a violation of the noise ordinance, you can go to the magistrate and try to convince them to take their evidence.
So, if we agree with your
Proposal.
ideas here, what do you want us to do?
I'd like y'all to vote on, to approve it, to move to the full city council. The ordinance changes are in draft form right now, but I would like to, before they, of course, they go to the full city council, they'll be put in a full final form, so that it can be voted on. So what I'm asking from y'all is approval of the proposed revisions and recommend their adoption by the full city council.
Move. Yep, so move.
Second.
Thank you.
John, thanks so much for being proactive.
Glad
about
to do
this.
it.
You just want
But,
about
when it does come to council, I would hope we would also hear from what other parts of staff are affected here.
That's a great
They
idea.
support that.
It's a great idea. I'll make sure that development services is there, police is there, to speak to any concerns.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with the development services, I would just suggest that, I know that you put a little piece of paper up, when construction is happening. I mean, if they could just add to that, for noise complaints, call somebody.
That's a good idea. It might be a posting requirement type of thing. I imagine the form they're going to go to start off with, at least, and dipping their toes into regular noise, which is not something they've done before. They're going to be looking at after-hours permitting, so that if you want to work outside, our noise ordinance purports to contain a clause like that seems to require an after-hours permit. It doesn't. If you actually read down it still just says that if you don't have an after-hours permit, well, it might be one of those things that tends to produce a noise disturbance. It's just not particularly well written. I imagine that development services is going to go down that avenue of actually having an enforceable after-hours process for these things. And then they might start, for these larger projects, regulating the construction that's taking place during normal working hours. For the things that they have scope, for instance, there are a lot of projects that take place in Asheville, DOT projects, construction performed by Buncombe County, that are not permitted by the city. So we would not have authority there, but this would knock off a large chunk of the construction happening in Asheville, subjected to noise regulation.
Before we move to public comment, I have a question for you, Wade. We received information today, a press release, information about charges that have been filed on an individual in a 2008 sexual assault cold case. And the information within the press release stated that there is an SBI minimum standard before a sexual assault case can be tested, and that leaves us with like 573 untested kids. I wanted to know if we have any information or any documentation that outlines those minimum standards.
Yeah, I don't have that on me. Certainly there are. And yes, we do. All of our DNA submittals go to the State Bureau of Investigation, and it does meet their minimum standards forward. So that is the challenge with that. This past year, the state has implemented a study kind of going on nationwide, looking at particularly rape cases and sexual assault cases to review non-tested DNA samples that law enforcement agencies may have. So we have recently, within the past 6 months, went through and inventoried all of our cases and submitted that to the state. So there's work going on with that, but I just don't have that data in front of me.
Well, thank you all for your work on breaking this code. Well, he's not arrested yet, but we do have charges
We,
for us. Okay.
right, we do know the subject,
Yeah.
and it's called a CODIS hit, and based off the DNA. So it's a great tool to have, and that's kind of the trend going on nationally. Is now that they're reviewing cases, you're getting a lot more sexual assault and rape delayed hits on known suspects that have been charged elsewhere throughout the nation with some other offense which required them to have a DNA submitted.
I just wanted
It's a
to bring
great
that up
tool.
to the committee because I think we should have our eye on those standards, so we'll know exactly what's going on within our city, because, you know, we live in a great culture, and a lot of, the assault claims can be easily denied by some people, but I think we should know exactly what our procedures are.
I think there's some retooling going on at the state level as far as the criteria as well, so.
Thank you.
Certainly. If no other questions, I'm going to leave. Got to go do time.
Okay, thank you.
Well, approved time.
Okay, then we'll now move into public comment. Anyone wishing to speak can come up, and you got 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, I'm Peter Landis. I live downtown. I'm also a member of the Issues Committee of DARN, Downtown Asheville Residential Neighbors. My statement may seem a bit meandering because it wasn't until just before I came down here that I saw the proposed noise amendments online. So I scribbled some notes, and I'll be reading from them as best I can. I'm not very good, my nuns would not be happy with my penmanship. Glad to hear about parking dogs, glad to hear about construction, nothing about commercial establishments. And I understand that the city attorney's office says that, you know, there's no easy way to deal with it. Well, then let's do one of 3 things. Let's punt, let's kick the can down the road, or let's throw in the towel. I think they all amount to the same thing. Council has been moving towards pushing greater density in Asheville. Greater density means more noise or more possibilities for noise, and the necessity of finding a way to deal with that. Downtown is becoming more residential. And there obviously is a tension between businesses, establishments, bars, breweries, clubs that have been downtown all along, which deserve to continue, and the needs of residents who are coming in. This document, whatever it is, does not recognize any of that or attempt to recognize it. You know, to say that if a police officer can't deal with a situation, an agreed tenant or agreed resident can always go to the magistrate's office. I think Vice Mayor Whistler was right to raise a question about what happens then. I don't see any sign that a magistrate is going to immediately issue some kind of a summons, having no information about what actually has occurred. If you're dealing with an eviction, the owner of a property can show records that rent hasn't been paid. But how does someone go into a magistrate's office with what? There's nothing that's shown there. As I said, let's see. It seems that the staff and the city's attorney office seem to be content to just pass on this. I mean, eliminating this whole section of alleged redundant provisions is basically punted. You know, they're saying the list does not aid enforcement. Well, it doesn't. Eliminating it doesn't aid enforcement either. We're left with nothing. Well, it says, what are the cons here? None. I think if you ask people downtown, for example, whether there are cons when potential noise problems cannot be dealt with, they would say there are cons to that issue that have to be addressed. You know, also at one point, the city attorney talked about, you know, a property it was a little bit too loud. Well, I think that was literally the concerns of the people who brought it to say it was a little bit too loud. Based on what? I don't think that the concerns of people who are trying to deal with noise issues are being addressed properly, are being addressed carefully. And I think more has to be done in that sphere so that businesses and residents can live side by side peacefully. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I'm Sue Robbins, also of the Issues Committee of DARN. We spoke to you last month too. Sort of echoing what you had to say, it's kind of disappointing. We've been watching and watching for the agenda to come up and the documents to come out so we could be prepared. And, you know, as of 12:30, we didn't see them. I didn't. I'm lucky Peter printed them out before he came. I'd just like to bring up a couple of things. I don't really think there's anything so wrong with the proposals that the city's attorney is proposing. I think they probably are moving in the correct direction, but I don't think they recognize other things maybe that could be done, or perhaps the city could look harder at other departments or other whatever that have an effect on noise. And I don't know what they all are either, but I think it's worth looking at because honestly, from hearing the presentation, it doesn't really feel like there's a recognition that noise really is a problem. It seems more like if we do this, we can reduce the number of people maybe complaining and satisfy a few more people, but it is a problem. It's a serious problem. And it's a big problem for us because we do not live in an area that's zoned as residential, which I think is another issue. I have read the Living Asheville new comprehensive plan, and there is mention in there that it might be time to clean up zoning, maybe create fewer zones. If that were done, I certainly think that it would make downtown residents feel a lot more recognized if there was some kind of recognition. Not that obviously this isn't a residential neighborhood, but that it is partly a residential neighborhood. One thing I would like you to be aware of as far as when we make complaints, a lot of the noise that is a problem for us occurs in the late night and early morning hours, a lot of times on the weekends, or more predominantly on the weekends. And what we get when we call the non-emergency police line, and I'm not blaming the police for this, but they are somewhat understaffed, and when we make those calls at that time of day and on the weekends, we get auxiliary officers responding who aren't familiar sometimes even with where the bar is, and they have a lot of other complaints to deal with, you know, maybe involving physical violence, maybe, who knows, but a noise complaint is way at the bottom of the list, and so sometimes they don't even get responded to. And many times when an officer does come and respond, they sort of have the idea that, well, why did you move downtown if you thought there would be no noise? And we certainly don't think that there will be no noise, but we do think that if the city wants the downtown area to have more residents, to have places where people can afford to live, then we need, time's up? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tom
That microphone
Ferran.
doesn't work.
I'm sorry?
That microphone doesn't
Doesn't
work. It looks good, but. Sorry.
Okay, my name is Tom Ferran. I'm a resident of downtown. I live on Haywood Street. And I don't want to repeat what Sue and Peter just said. I agree with everything they said. I'm coming away from this very discouraged, to be honest with you. Larry Holt and I have been dealing with a commercial establishment for well over a year. Numerous times we've called the police. Okay, sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't. In Sue's point, typically the noise starts at 12:30 a.m. Okay, we'll go past a lot of times 2 a.m. Okay, they open their windows, they put the speakers in the windows, and they blare music throughout the streets. We've met with the owners, with the owner, doesn't care, frankly, doesn't care, okay, about that he's causing noise. He said to both Larry and I, he's in the business of providing entertainment, and he's very proud of what he's done for the city of Asheville, okay? And he does not see our perspective, okay? And we try to share with him our perspective is that we are neighbors, okay? And he has no right to infringe on our privacy, okay? Frankly, I think a lot of people downtown have given up complaining because there's nobody to complain to. The police, if they show up at all, will say, I asked them to tone it down. So that's the response for one instance, and then a week later, we're right back at it again. Okay? I'm sure you would not want to be woken up at 12:30, 1 a.m., 2:30 in the morning with this. Yet we are bombarded with it downtown. And frankly, I think the city is abnegating their responsibility. You're more than willing to take our taxes, but you're not willing to step up and enforce noise ordinances. So, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
My turn. Larry Holt, downtown resident for about 12 years. I've got 2 more complaints to add to your stack. She told me to call you. You're not returning my call.
This is where the complaint is. There's more.
Okay, she told me to call you, get it to you. You'll be here today. Okay.
In the complaint processing department right now.
Thank you, sir.
Larry Holt, 21 Haywood Street, Unit 2C. I share the complaint. We've got 3 different complaints on this same issue. We have met with the owner and the managers, and the owner said, I'll instruct my folks to close the windows, take the speakers out at 10 o'clock, which the ordinance runs from, you can make noise from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And he's aware of that. And he said he would do that. And his staff has not been doing that. The latest excuse was that their customers open the windows. So, but anyway, we've got 3 filed complaints. We expected to have the current committee hear them. And one other thing, the central business district, the only thing you cannot do is heavy industry. And certainly residential is a part of that. And when the noise ordinance was last reviewed, we appeared and said, please include residential in the central business district as a part of this zoning restriction of 6 to 10. So that was done, and we expect somebody to do something. We've met, we have documentation of the meetings and the correspondence and emails, and I think we got a pretty good case. My success with the noise ordinance, it is a complaint-driven ordinance, which is good. Don't come to them unless you got a complaint. We had dumpsters being emptied at 4 o'clock in the morning at my back window, bedroom window. We took it to noise court. I talked with them and they said, no, we can do it anytime we want. You can't do that. Took them to noise court. They were fined $50 and they haven't done it again. They'll come at 6:10 in the morning to empty them, which is fine. I wake up at 6. that was a success. I'm expecting the city to step up and do it again, regardless of what you're doing here. If you're gonna amend the ordinance, you need to have some public input, not just council saying, yeah, let's do it. That's what John said we needed to do it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Patrick Conan. I'm actually here today to try to relay some of the thoughts from Carmen Ramos Kennedy and Dee Williams from the NAACP around the written consent policy. So I'm going to do my best to do that. Just for a little bit of context for everyone, you know, I last met with Dee Williams with APD to look at our traffic stop data in November 2016, so over 2 years ago. I've personally been in 15 meetings talking about it, and we haven't really, none of the details have changed. We're just still waiting for this policy to happen. I think it's important to note that City Council did vote on written consent and other restrictions on consent searches, not once but twice, in May and I believe June or July of this year. And when that vote occurred, we expected the policies to move forward. There were subsequent meetings where Kathy Ball, as the interim city manager, told us, working with the NAACP and the council, that she would see this policy through and that we would not leave it to the next city manager. And we certainly would not leave it to the next chief. So what's concerning is to see that now, you know, months later in the process, the policy was supposed to be in place by the end of October, and we're now in December, and we're talking about a new process to get feedback from a chief that hasn't been selected. I don't think that that was the desire of council, and honestly, I don't think that that's in alignment with what was promised to the NAACP, to council, to the community by our city staff to move this forward. So here we are now, you know, at another public safety committee meeting, still talking about written consent. And I just want to emphasize that I feel that it's very important that we don't reset this process. Let's just see it through. I know that the NAACP has provided a draft policy for city staff to review. I think we have the details figured out, and it just isn't happening. I think it's very frustrating that there's been very little public accountability for the process to this point, and I really encourage council to step up and create a better feedback loop here. If those are updates to council, that could make sense. But we have to do something to put this process back in the light and get it to the finish line. Because if we go into next year and start this process all over again, that would not be a positive scene for our community. And there's many of us who are willing to continue to show up and continue to push for this until it happens. But I think we should be past that. We need to be moving our city forward. So that's all I have to say, but thank you very much, and please do see this process through. Thank you.
What else?
I'm Brian. I'm over on Westover. I'm going to reiterate things that other people have reiterated. What's that?
Last name?
Oh,
Brian.
my family name's Matt. So, it appears that wherever you go in Asheville now, there's noise. It's not getting taken care of. It also appears that the city condones it. Like, they allow it. They don't really say anything about it. You call the police. Still, to my knowledge, not all calls get logged. There's no easy way to do a data search to see who's perpetrating all of the stuff. I can hear Salvage Station when they're having indoor concerts. I can hear them when they're outdoor concerts. Nobody seems to care. You know, I don't know, there's federal laws on noise. There's like federal laws on lots of stuff. It doesn't seem like the city's stepping up to the, solve these issues. So the only thing I see to do now is to push it into court or like push it into media. So I don't know if you all have any opinions on this, but you know, I'm with some other people that are here. I don't think that nothing's been done. It's been over 18 months since some of this started with the Salvage Station. There's now new venues starting, outdoor concerts. You've got the Stump Dump. That thing roars. You know, I don't know why people think it's okay to infringe upon somebody else's rights. At least make it okay and state that it's okay, that somebody forces you to listen to their stuff, that it's okay for us to return the favor. That, you know, if they can make 85 decibel noise, 95 decibels of their property, we can do the same. Or if they're pushing 75 decibels to my house, I can push 75 back. I'm pretty sure if I had a 75 decibel party in my backyard, I would be asked to stop that. But it appears that not once has the salvage station been cited a citation. And looking at your numbers, $13,000 was in the report that I think John submitted. And you know, if you just been finding the people that have been violating noise ordinance the whole time, I'm sure you would have collected more than that. You know, they probably would still be violating it because $300 is nothing. But you know, that number of 13,000, 50 plus. So I don't have much else to say, but I'd like to see this solved soon because I've heard many people that are ready to move over noise, and that's ridiculous. So I'd also like you all to solve the noise issue with potential interstates coming through. I know when you were at the I-26 meeting, so I hope you all start taking this seriously because it is a public health issue. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Randy Hall, and I live in the Montford Historic District in a 95-year-old house built by some of Asheville's founding fathers, the Cox family. And, you know, when I moved to the neighborhood, when I moved to Asheville 21 years ago, it was a whole lot different than it is today. I can say what needs to be done in the noise ordinance, given your financial background, something quantitative has to be put in there. It is too subjective for anyone to be able to enforce. There's no quantitative measure in there anywhere. How do you enforce it if it's subjective? What I can also say is I can hear the salvage station from my house. I'm on Pearson Drive. As the crow flies about a half a mile away. My windows rattle with the concerts taking place. Some of the original windows with storm windows on those. I have some newer windows double pane. I go inside, I can still hear the salvage station. If I'm sitting on my deck, you and I could not have this conversation. We would not hear each other. Now, the Hazel Robinson Amphitheater has had concerts starting up there. Free concerts, which is nice to be able to afford those for people to be able to go to, but you have to buy your food and drink there. So they have brought in now speakers to an outdoor amphitheater before that has never had a speaker. So we're getting blasted from the south, we're getting blasted from the west. I don't hear the Stump Dump as much. I think they've switched some equipment, but the Stump Dump was running from 8 to 5. Salvage Station picks up from 5 to 11. And then you've got the Montford Park Players, which has just started with this new concert series. I think something has to be done so we can live in harmony. But, you know, I've invested over $700,000. That may not be much money for you. It's a heck of a lot of money for me to have to walk away from that. So I think, you know, put something quantitative in so that we can work together on this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Thompson. I've lived in Montford since 1977. And this was the first really frustrating summer that we had, the first frustrating year. We've heard noise from the salvage station, and I understand that people can disagree on what is really a nuisance as far as noise. But when we're inside the house with the windows closed and can hear and feel the music that's coming from more than a quarter of a mile away, I don't think, to me, that is unreasonable. And anyone who would be in our house with us would also agree that that's unreasonable. And it is frustrating. I understand that some changes need to be made in the noise ordinance, but it's frustrating that we don't seem to have any recourse. We've called the police, called the owner of the salvage station. So whatever changes you're able to affect, it would make me feel better if we had some recourse when we were not able to sleep and other children on the street and other grown-ups on the street were not able to sleep. Thank you.
I'm Mary Thompson. I kept thinking, why aren't those people speaking to me? 48 Westover Drive, and it has been, I can speak for over probably 150, 200 homes, households on Tacoma Circle, Westover Drive, which is a circle, Rosewood, Pearson, and Brian has children, and they are the closest to the salvage station. This is concerning the salvage station. And the base beat, when you have that inside your house, you are not able to escape it. And it may start at 3 in the afternoon and go for 2 hours. You never know the day. It can be 3 nights in a row, starting at 6 o'clock, going till 10. Many of us wrote emails to the owner back in May, and he wrote back, we were all talking about the noise. And to have that base beat in your house from 6 to 10. And he wrote back and he said, I'm so glad you all are happy about the 10 o'clock hour that we are stopping the music. So there's got to be some way to coexist, but just as the downtown and just as what we are dealing with, it's not 5 households. It's 150 or 200 households hearing various levels, but you can't escape from the noise. And when Burger King went in on Merriman Avenue, all those people in surrounding streets couldn't do anything about the smoke. I think for the noise ordinance, we need to address this music venues. I know they're on Riverside, but they come straight up and affect many, many households and many with children. So something, we are speaking for several hundred households. Thank you.
Can I add something? I'll come over. Multiple times people bring up the time of day. There are a lot of people nowadays that work from home. So having stuff go on during the day that disturbs their ability to work from their house just because somebody else decides to push noise their way, I find unreasonable also. And I don't think that's something that's been addressed or thought about. I get that people want to sleep, but also people need to be able to work. And I know that was one of the issues that someone that lived by Stump Dump was having, because they're trying to have telephone conversations and they can't. So it's just taken away from use and enjoyment of people's homes. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, before we adjourn, these changes that have been proposed today that we're sending to council as far as the noise ordinance, I think you folks should just look at what they are and then contact us and let us know what you think these particular changes, you're not satisfied with the way it's working now, so it's not working. And if you think this is going to make matters worse, then let us know how you think that's going to make matters worse. Because that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make it work a little better by these changes. So just please stay in touch with all of us and let us know what you think about these particular changes. And if we need to revisit the entire noise ordinance, which it almost sounds like that's what we need to do, then that's what we should do.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think we just let you know what we think.
I know, and I'm asking you to let the rest of council know and to study it further. And I haven't heard it clearly put how each of these changes is going to affect you and make matters worse for you. So that's what I'm asking you to let us do, because we're most likely going to implement some of these changes. And if but if we hear that there's a particular change here that doesn't work, then maybe that won't go through.
Right. I think, and I think we're not necessarily saying these are bad. We're saying we don't think they go far enough. We think there's other things that could be done even outside of the noise ordinance.
And that will probably have to go after this.
We'll put it in there.
Okay.
I'd love to see a reasonable statement of what one can expect
Okay.
buying a home.
I think I've already let this go further than I'm supposed to do.
Sorry.
Okay.
Can I respond just real quick?
Yes.
I think at the outset I said that I'm not going to be able to address everybody's issues. I'm looking at a very narrow subset of issues where I'm looking through it. I think I said that I don't know the best solution for the issue that y'all bring up, which is commercial noise. I don't know that. I know that the way that the ordinance is written now, I can propose these changes to maybe make the way it is written work a little better. And I certainly am not the expert on noise. I just know that I've seen how this law that we have now works. I think these changes will make some aspects of it better, but I don't think it's addressing your concerns. What I'm proposing here. I would like to, but I don't have those with this set of changes. Okay.
With that, we're adjourned.